Every morning before sunrise, Mariam arrived at the Okafor mansion. The massive gates opened slowly as security guards barely glanced at her. To them, she was invisible. To the wealthy Okafor family, she was simply the cleaner. For 12 years, she swept their floors, polished their furniture, washed their dishes, and cleaned the rooms where million-dollar decisions were made. Nobody asked about her life. Nobody cared about her opinions. When guests arrived, they walked past her as if she were part of the furniture. Mariam never complained. She simply smiled and continued working. What nobody realized was that while they ignored her presence, she noticed everything. She heard every argument behind closed doors. She witnessed every secret meeting. She saw tears hidden behind expensive smiles. She watched family members pretend to love one another while secretly plotting against each other. The mansion looked perfect from the outside. Luxury cars filled the driveway. Expensive parties attracted influential guests. The family appeared powerful and united. But Mariam knew better. Behind those polished marble walls lived people trapped by greed, jealousy, betrayal, and fear. For 12 years she carried their secrets silently. And one day, those secrets would change everything. The head of the family was Chief Emmanuel Okafor, a wealthy businessman respected throughout the region. Newspapers praised him. Politicians visited him. Community leaders admired him. To the public, he was a generous man who built schools, donated money, and helped struggling families. But inside the mansion, a different reality existed. Emmanuel's health was declining rapidly. Doctors visited more frequently each month. Some days he struggled to walk without assistance. His children noticed. His relatives noticed. Most importantly, Mariam noticed. While cleaning his study one afternoon, she overheard a heated argument between Emmanuel and his eldest son, Victor. The conversation was intense. Victor demanded control of the family businesses. Emmanuel refused. Voices grew louder. Accusations filled the room. Then came a sentence Mariam would never forget. "You only care about the money." Emmanuel shouted. Silence followed. A heavy, uncomfortable silence. Mariam quietly stepped away before anyone noticed her presence. But the argument confirmed what she had suspected for years. The family was preparing for a battle over the inheritance. And when wealthy families fight over money, nothing remains hidden forever. A few weeks later, Mariam discovered something unusual while cleaning the west wing of the mansion. Most family members rarely entered that area. The rooms remained locked for years. Doors covered forgotten furniture. Portraits of long-dead relatives hung silently on the walls. As she cleaned an old storage room, she noticed a small wooden box hidden behind shelves. Curious, she examined it carefully. Inside were dozens of old letters tied together with faded ribbon. Mariam knew she shouldn't read them. Yet something about them felt important. One envelope immediately caught her attention. It carried Emmanuel's handwriting and was addressed to someone named Sarah. Mariam had worked in the mansion for over a decade and had never heard that name before. Before she could investigate further, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Startled, she quickly returned everything to its place. But the discovery remained in her thoughts. Who was Sarah? Why were these letters hidden? And why had nobody ever mentioned her? Mariam had a feeling the answers were connected to one of the family's oldest secrets. Days later, the mansion hosted one of its famous family gatherings. Expensive cars lined the driveway. Wealthy relatives arrived dressed in designer clothing. Smiles filled the air, but Mariam noticed something different. Everyone seemed nervous. Conversations stopped whenever Emmanuel entered the room. Family members exchanged suspicious glances. Victor barely spoke to his younger brother Daniel. Their sister Angela appeared unusually tense. While serving drinks, Mariam overheard fragments of conversations. Discussions about lawyers, documents, ownership, shares. The atmosphere felt less like a celebration and more like a battlefield waiting for the first attack. Then something unexpected happened. Emmanuel stood and announced he had made an important decision regarding his estate. The room instantly fell silent. Every face turned toward him. Before he could continue, a sudden coughing fit interrupted him. The announcement never came. Yet the brief moment revealed something important. Everyone in the room feared what Emmanuel might say. And fear usually appears when people have something to lose. Late that same night, Mariam stayed behind to finish cleaning. The mansion was unusually quiet. Most guests had left. Family members had retired to their rooms. As she passed Emmanuel's private study, she noticed the door slightly open. Light spilled into the hallway. Curious, she glanced inside. Emmanuel sat alone at his desk writing something by hand. His face looked troubled. Exhausted. For several minutes he stared at a document before carefully placing it inside a large envelope. Then he sealed it and wrote 3 words across the front. Open after my death. Mariam froze. A chill ran through her body. Before she could look away, Emmanuel raised his eyes and noticed her standing there. Surprisingly, he didn't appear angry. Instead, he smiled sadly. Mariam, he said softly. One day this family will need the truth. Then he placed the envelope inside a locked drawer. At the time, Mariam didn't understand what he meant. But within a few weeks, Emmanuel Okafor would be dead. And everyone inside that mansion would begin fighting over secrets they thought were buried forever. 3 weeks after the family gathering, tragedy struck the Okafor mansion. Early one rainy morning, chaos erupted throughout the estate. Servants ran through hallways. Security guards rushed toward the main house. Family members emerged from their rooms in panic. Mariam immediately sensed something was wrong. When she entered the main hallway, she saw Victor standing outside his father's bedroom speaking urgently into a phone. Angela was crying. Daniel looked completely stunned. A few minutes later, the family doctor arrived. The silence that followed felt heavier than any words. Chief Emmanuel Okafor had passed away during the night. News spread quickly across the city. Television stations reported the death of one of the region's most respected businessmen. Politicians released statements. Business leaders expressed condolences. Hundreds of people arrived at the mansion throughout the day. Yet behind the tears and public mourning, something darker was already beginning. Mariam noticed family members whispering in private corners. Lawyers were suddenly being contacted. Important documents were being discussed. Even before the funeral arrangements were finalized, the battle for Emmanuel's fortune had quietly begun. And everyone seemed desperate to secure their place in the future he left behind. The funeral attracted thousands of people. Community leaders praised Emmanuel's generosity. Religious leaders described his legacy. Business partners shared stories of his success. To outsiders, the Okafor family appeared united in grief. They stood together, smiled politely, accepted condolences. But Mariam could see through the performance. She noticed Victor avoiding Daniel whenever cameras were nearby. She noticed Angela having secret conversations with lawyers. She noticed several relatives arriving at the mansion with unusual frequency. During one evening after the funeral, Mariam entered the room unexpectedly while cleaning. Inside, Victor and his uncle were discussing company ownership. The conversation stopped immediately when they saw her. Victor's expression hardened. "Can't you knock?" he snapped. Mariam quietly apologized and left. But she had had enough. They weren't discussing grief. They weren't discussing family. They were discussing control. The death of Emmanuel had created a vacuum of power, and everyone wanted to fill it. What frightened Mariam most was how quickly people seemed to forget the man they had buried only days earlier. Several days later, the family's lawyer arrived at the mansion carrying an important briefcase. Everyone knew what it contained. Emmanuel's will. Family members gathered inside the main conference room. The atmosphere felt tense. Nervous. Almost hostile. Mariam wasn't invited, of course. She remained outside cleaning nearby hallways. Yet the large wooden doors couldn't completely block the raised voices inside. The lawyer began reading Emmanuel's final wishes. At first everything seemed straightforward. Certain business assets were divided among family members. Properties were assigned. Investments were distributed. Then suddenly the meeting changed. Voices became louder. Someone shouted. A chair scraped against the floor. Moments later, Victor stormed out of the room furious. His face burned with anger. Behind him, Angela looked equally shocked. Daniel appeared confused. Something unexpected had happened. Something nobody anticipated. As Victor passed Mariam, he muttered a sentence under his breath. He changed everything. Mariam immediately remembered the envelope Emmanuel had hidden weeks earlier. The one marked, "Open after my death." For the first time, she wondered if the contents of that envelope were connected to the chaos unfolding around her. That evening, Mariam worked late cleaning Emmanuel's former study. The room felt different now. Empty. Silent. As she dusted bookshelves, she noticed something unusual. One drawer of Emmanuel's desk was slightly open. The same drawer where she had seen him place the mysterious envelope. Her heart raced. She knew she shouldn't look. Yet curiosity overwhelmed her. Carefully opening the drawer, she discovered it was completely empty. The envelope was gone. Someone had already removed it. But another object remained hidden beneath several documents. It was a small key. Old and worn from years of use. Attached was a faded label containing only 3 handwritten words. West Wing Archive. Immediately Mariam remembered the dusty storage room and the mysterious letters she had discovered weeks earlier. Suddenly the pieces began connecting. The hidden letters. The secret envelope. The unusual tension surrounding Emmanuel's will. Whatever secret existed inside this family was larger than money. Much larger. And somehow, Emmanuel had left clues behind for someone to find. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Mariam stood outside the abandoned West Wing holding the key tightly in her hand. The hallway felt cold and silent. Moonlight streamed through dusty windows. For several moments she hesitated. Opening locked family archives could cost her job. It could create serious problems. Yet something inside her urged her forward. Slowly she inserted the key into an old metal door hidden behind storage shelves. The lock clicked open. Her heart pounded. Inside was a forgotten archive room filled with boxes, files, photographs, and decades of family records. Dust covered everything. As Mariam stepped inside, her flashlight revealed rows of documents stretching across the room. Then her eyes landed on something that made her freeze. A large file sat alone on a table. Across the front, written in Emmanuel's unmistakable handwriting, were 4 shocking words. The truth about Sarah. Mariam stared at the file in disbelief. The mysterious woman from the hidden letters. The secret nobody discussed. The name buried for decades. Whatever was inside that file had been important enough for Emmanuel to hide. And important enough for someone else to desperately keep hidden. Mariam locked the archive room behind her and carefully carried the file labeled, "The Truth About Sarah," to a small desk near the window. Dust floated through the moonlight as her hands trembled. For years she had cleaned this mansion. For years she had witnessed arguments, secrets, and betrayals. Yet something told her this discovery was different. Slowly she opened the file. The first page contained a photograph taken nearly 30 years earlier. A young Emmanuel Okafor stood smiling beside a beautiful woman. Mariam immediately recognized Emmanuel, but the woman was unfamiliar. On the back of the photograph, a handwritten note read, Emmanuel and Sarah, 1994. Mariam's heart skipped a beat. Sarah was real. She wasn't a distant relative. She wasn't a forgotten employee. She was someone important. As Mariam continued reading, she discovered letters exchanged between Emmanuel and Sarah over many years. The letters were filled with affection, hope, and promises. They spoke about a future together. A future that never happened. Then Mariam reached a document that made her freeze completely. It was a birth certificate. The father's name read Emmanuel Okafor. The mother's name read Sarah Nwosu. And beneath them was the name of a child. A child nobody in the mansion had ever mentioned. A child who legally belonged to the Okafor family. A child who apparently disappeared from history. Suddenly Mariam understood why Emmanuel hid these records. The family wasn't just fighting over money. They were fighting over an inheritance that might belong to someone else entirely. The deeper Mariam searched, the more shocking the truth became. Decades earlier, before marrying his wife, Emmanuel had been deeply in love with Sarah. According to the letters, they planned to marry and build a life together. But Emmanuel's wealthy family strongly opposed the relationship. Sarah came from a poor background. She lacked social status. Powerful relatives believed she would damage the Okafor family's reputation. Under enormous pressure, Emmanuel ended the relationship and eventually married another woman. Yet Sarah was already pregnant. The child was born in secret. For years Emmanuel secretly supported them financially while publicly pretending they didn't exist. Mariam's eyes filled with disbelief as she read every page. The story felt tragic. Cruel. Heartbreaking. Then she discovered another letter written much later in Emmanuel's life. In it, he expressed regret. Deep regret. He admitted abandoning Sarah was the greatest mistake he had ever made. He wrote that one day he intended to correct the injustice. Mariam immediately thought about the family meeting before Emmanuel's death. The interrupted announcement. The mysterious envelope. The anger after the will reading. Suddenly everything began making sense. As dawn approached, Mariam found the most important documents in the entire archive. Hidden inside a sealed folder was a recent legal statement signed by Emmanuel only months before his death. Her hands shook as she read the contents. The document confirmed that Sarah's child was alive. Not only alive, but legally recognized by Emmanuel shortly before his death. More importantly, Emmanuel intended to transfer a significant portion of his estate to this previously unknown heir. Mariam stared at the paper in disbelief. This explained Victor's anger. It explained Angela's shock. It explained why family members seemed terrified whenever inheritance discussion occurred. If this document became public, everything would change. The fortune they expected to inherit would be divided. Control of businesses could shift. Properties could be reassigned. The entire power structure of the Okafor family would collapse overnight. Suddenly Mariam heard footsteps outside the archive room. Her heart raced. Someone else was awake. Someone else might know about the secret. Quickly gathering the documents, she switched off her flashlight. The footsteps stopped outside the door. Silence followed. Then a voice whispered from the hallway. "Who's in there?" Mariam recognized the voice immediately. It belonged to Victor. Mariam remained completely silent. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared Victor would hear it through the door. Several seconds passed. Then the footsteps slowly moved away. Only after the silence returned did she allow herself to breathe. Carefully, she hid the most important documents beneath her cleaning supplies and left the archive room through a different corridor. As she walked back toward the servants' quarters, her mind raced with questions. Who was Sarah's child? Where were they now? Did anyone else know the truth? Most importantly, why had Emmanuel trusted these records to remain hidden instead of revealing everything publicly? The next morning, tension inside the mansion reached new levels. Victor argued with lawyers. Angela locked herself inside her room. Daniel seemed increasingly frustrated by the secrecy surrounding the estate. Everyone sensed something was wrong, but nobody knew exactly what. Meanwhile, Mariam carried a secret capable of changing every person's future. For the first time in 12 years, the invisible cleaner had become the most powerful person in the mansion. That afternoon, while organizing old records in Emmanuel's study, Mariam made a discovery that nearly caused her to drop the file she was holding. Tucked inside one of Emmanuel's notebooks was a recent photograph. The image showed Emmanuel standing beside a young woman in her late 20s. Both were smiling. On the back of the photograph, Emmanuel had written, "My daughter. My greatest regret. My final chance to make things right." Mariam felt her knees weaken. Sarah's child wasn't a son. It was a daughter. And she was alive. The photograph included an address and a name. Grace Nwosu. For years, the Okafor family had no idea she existed. Yet according to Emmanuel's final wishes, she might inherit a significant portion of everything they owned. Mariam stared at the photograph. Then she looked toward the mansion window where Victor was speaking angrily with his lawyers. If Victor discovered Grace before the truth became public, there was no telling what he might do. For the first time, Mariam realized this wasn't just about inheritance anymore. Someone's future, perhaps even someone's safety, could depend on what happened next. Victor knew something was wrong. For days, he had watched people carefully. The reading of the will had not gone the way he expected. The lawyers were avoiding direct answers. Certain documents were missing. Most importantly, someone had entered parts of the mansion that should have remained untouched. Victor wasn't stupid. He understood that his father had hidden something before his death. Something powerful enough to change the inheritance. Standing inside Emmanuel's old study, he stared at the family portrait hanging above the fireplace. The image showed wealth, success, and unity. Yet Victor now suspected it was all built on lies. His frustration grew stronger every day. During a private meeting with the family lawyers, he demanded answers. The lawyers refused to reveal confidential information. That refusal only increased his suspicion. Meanwhile, Mariam quietly continued her work, pretending nothing had changed. But she noticed Victor watching her more often. His eyes followed her movements through the mansion. His questions became more personal. His behavior became more aggressive. Deep inside, Mariam sensed danger approaching. If Victor discovered she knew about Grace, the situation could become very serious. For the first time since finding the secret archive, fear began replacing curiosity. Yet she also remembered Emmanuel's words. One day this family will need the truth. She couldn't ignore them now. That evening, Mariam decided she could no longer wait. She copied the address written behind Grace's photograph and left the mansion early the next morning. The address led to a modest neighborhood on the opposite side of the city. The contrast was striking. Gone were luxury gates and expensive cars. Here, people worked ordinary jobs and lived simple lives. Mariam eventually arrived at a small community health center. She hesitated before entering. What if Grace refused to listen? What if she already knew the truth? What if she had no interest in the Okafor family? Taking a deep breath, Mariam stepped inside. A receptionist directed her toward an office near the back of the building. Through the partially open door, Mariam saw a young woman helping an elderly patient. The woman smiled warmly. She spoke gently. She looked nothing like the greedy relatives fighting inside the mansion. When the patient left, Mariam introduced herself. "Are you Grace Nwosu?" she asked quietly. The young woman nodded. What happened next would change both their lives forever. Grace listened patiently as Mariam explained who she was. At first, she seemed confused. Then cautious. Then shocked. When Mariam mentioned Emmanuel Okafor, Grace's expression changed completely. Tears immediately filled her eyes. She slowly opened a desk drawer and removed an old photograph. It was the same photograph Mariam had discovered in Emmanuel's notebook. "He visited me several times over the last few years," Grace admitted softly. "He told me he wanted to make things right." Mariam felt a wave of relief. At least Grace knew part of the truth. But Grace's next words were even more surprising. Emmanuel had planned to publicly acknowledge her during the family gathering before his death. The announcement had been delayed because lawyers were finalizing documents. Unfortunately, Emmanuel died before completing the process. Since then, Grace had received strange phone calls from unknown numbers. Some callers warned her to stay away from the Okafor family. Others tried to learn where she lived. She never understood why. Now everything made sense. Someone knew she existed. Someone was trying to keep her hidden. Back at the mansion, Victor's suspicions finally exploded into action. He hired a private investigator to locate missing records connected to Emmanuel's estate. Within days, the investigator discovered evidence that someone had accessed the West Wing archive. Security footage revealed a surprising figure entering restricted areas late at night. Mariam. Victor immediately demanded answers. When she returned to the mansion that evening, he confronted her in front of several family members. The accusation shocked everyone. Victor demanded to know what she had taken from the archive. Mariam remained calm despite the pressure. She denied stealing anything. The confrontation grew increasingly heated. Angela and Daniel watched nervously. Servants stopped working and stared. Finally, Victor lost control. "You know about Sarah," he shouted. The room instantly fell silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. For the first time, Sarah's name had been spoken openly inside the mansion. The secret was no longer hidden. The war had officially begun. The following morning brought an unexpected development. Daniel secretly approached Mariam before breakfast. Unlike Victor, Daniel seemed genuinely concerned about discovering the truth. Quietly, he admitted he had overheard parts of his father's conversations before his death. He knew Sarah existed. He knew Emmanuel regretted something from the past. But he never knew the full story. Mariam faced an impossible decision. Should she trust Daniel? Should she reveal Grace's existence? Before she could answer, her phone vibrated. A new message appeared on the screen. It was from Grace. The message contained only one sentence. "Someone followed me home last night." Mariam's blood ran cold. The battle over the inheritance had become something far more dangerous. Someone was actively searching for Grace. Someone wanted to find her before the truth reached the public. And as Mariam stared at the message, she realized the final confrontation was approaching. The fate of the Okafor fortune. The future of Grace. And the truth Emmanuel died trying to reveal. Would soon collide in a way nobody expected. The following week, the Okafor mansion became the center of attention once again. Lawyers, business partners, relatives, and community leaders gathered for an emergency family meeting. Rumors had already spread throughout the city. People whispered about hidden heirs, secret documents, and a family conflict worth millions. Inside the grand conference hall, tension filled every corner of the room. Victor sat at the head of the table looking determined. Angela appeared nervous. Daniel remained unusually calm. Mariam stood quietly near the back wall, just as she had done for 12 years. Most people barely noticed her presence. To them, she was still only the cleaner. Nothing more. Nothing less. But today was different. Today she carried information capable of changing every person's future. As the meeting began, lawyers reviewed portions of Emmanuel's estate. Arguments quickly followed. Victor insisted the inheritance dispute should end immediately. He claimed there was no legitimate evidence supporting any additional heir. Several relatives agreed. Others demanded a full investigation. Voices grew louder. Tempers flared. Then one of the lawyers stood and made an announcement that silenced the room. Before this matter proceeds further, he said, someone has requested permission to present new evidence. Every eye turned toward the entrance. Slowly, the doors opened. A young woman stepped inside. Grace Nwosu had arrived. The room erupted instantly. Questions flew from every direction. Relatives whispered furiously. Angela looked completely stunned. Victor's face turned pale. Grace stood calmly despite the chaos surrounding her. For years she had lived an ordinary life without knowing she belonged to one of the wealthiest families in the region. Now dozens of strangers stared at her as if she were a threat. One lawyer requested silence and asked Grace to explain why she was present. Taking a deep breath, she revealed everything Emmanuel had told her during their private meetings. She described how he had apologized for abandoning her mother. She explained his desire to acknowledge her publicly. She even presented photographs, letters, and records proving Emmanuel maintained contact with her during the final years of his life. The evidence was powerful, emotional, difficult to dismiss. Some family members looked heartbroken. Others looked angry. But nobody looked more disturbed than Victor. Because with every document presented, the possibility became more real. Grace wasn't an outsider. She wasn't a fraud. She was Emmanuel Okafor's daughter. And if that was true, the inheritance battle had just changed forever. Victor refused to accept it. Rising from his chair, he accused Grace of manipulation. He accused lawyers of conspiracy. He accused Mariam of helping create the entire story. The room descended into chaos once again. Then Mariam did something nobody expected. For the first time in 12 years, she stepped forward and asked permission to speak. The room became silent. Many people looked confused. Why would the cleaner have anything important to say? Mariam reached into her bag and carefully placed several documents on the conference table. The hidden letters. The archive records. The legal statements Emmanuel signed before his death. Finally, she revealed copies of the documents she had discovered proving Emmanuel legally recognized Grace months before his passing. Gasps echoed throughout the room. The evidence was undeniable. Even Victor's own lawyers appeared stunned. One by one, they examined the documents and confirmed their authenticity. The truth could no longer be hidden. Emmanuel had spent years preparing to correct a mistake from his past. His final wish was clear. Grace belonged to the family. And no amount of anger, money, or influence could erase the evidence now sitting before everyone. As the reality settled over the room, something unexpected happened. Daniel stood up and crossed the room toward Grace. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then he extended his hand. "Welcome to the family," he said quietly. The gesture changed everything. Angela followed moments later. Tears filled her eyes as she apologized for years of ignorance. One by one, family members began accepting the truth. Not everyone was happy. Not everyone agreed. But the hostility started fading. Only Victor remained seated. Defeated. Silent. For years he believed wealth and power guaranteed control. Now he understood something his father learned too late. Truth eventually finds its way into the light. The lawyers finalized their review and announced the decision. Emmanuel's final wishes would be honored exactly as written. Grace would receive her rightful share of the estate. The legal battle was over. The secret Emmanuel carried for decades had finally been revealed. And strangely, instead of destroying the family completely, the truth had given them an opportunity to heal. Several months later, life inside the Okafor mansion looked very different. The inheritance war had ended. Business operations stabilized. Family relationships slowly improved. Grace remained humble despite her new circumstances. She continued working in healthcare and used part of her inheritance to support community projects her mother always dreamed about. The greatest surprise, however, involved Mariam. During a special family gathering, Daniel publicly thanked her for protecting Emmanuel's truth when nobody else would. Without her courage, the secret might have remained buried forever. Without her honesty, Grace might never have received justice. Standing before the entire family, Daniel announced a scholarship foundation in Emmanuel's memory. Then he revealed its first director, Mariam. Tears filled her eyes. For 12 years she had been invisible. Ignored. Overlooked. Treated as though her presence didn't matter. Yet in the end, she became the person who saved the family's future. As she looked around the room, she remembered all the years she spent quietly cleaning hallways while carrying everyone else's secrets. Now, for the first time, people truly saw her. Not as the cleaner. Not as a servant. But as the woman whose integrity changed everything. And in that moment, Mariam realized something beautiful. You don't need power to make a difference. Sometimes all you need is the courage to tell the truth.